Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Buckchester. You know what I like to do on my show? I want to enlighten you. I want to inspire you. I want to empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on a fire. And today, we want to get you fired up about the book, When Shadows Come Home. Its author is Oscar Diaz. So you know what I'm going to tell you to do. Go on, get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee or get your tea, because we are about to get started. Good morning, Oscar. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming and visiting with me today. Now, before we get started, as is our custom here, we always allow our guests to introduce themselves to perhaps those few people out there that are unfamiliar with you or unfamiliar with your work. So my first question is, what makes you you? What do you think has helped make you the person that you are today?
Well, I was born in Honduras, came to the United States of America in 1958. I'm married, have 2 great children and 4 great grandkids. I've grown up, for the most part, here in the state of Louisiana, other than a 3-year period where I served with the U.S. Army, a year in Vietnam, and a year and a half in Germany. I attended Louisiana State University, and I graduated in 1975. I retired from as a tax administrator from the Louisiana Department of Revenue and Taxation. I went to work for a company that did audits for the U.S. Defense Department until they closed the door in 2016, and I just felt too young to fully retire. I'm not sure what really retirement is. So I decided to do something I've always wanted to do right.
Absolutely, and I can definitely understand that. Well, thank you for your service. We definitely respect and honor all of our servicemen here on this program. So thank you so much for your dedication to country. We appreciate your sacrifice. Thank you so much for that. Now, being an author, I love how you're kind of hinting that that's something that you always wanted to do. At what moment did you realize not only that words had power and could be a force to be reckoned with, but when did you decide as well, flip side of the coin there, that it was time to write this book? And no more delaying, right now is the time for this?
Well, there's no one particular period of time in my life that I decided I was going to become a writer. I've always enjoyed reading, and there was a lot of books that I read, and I said, I could have done a lot better than that. And I've always told stories to my kids and to my grandkids. I mean, just made up stories for them, and they loved it. So, some people told me I was full of because I had so much stories in me. And so I decided that I needed to go ahead and start putting some of this down in writing. And I realized in 2015 that the company that I was working for, they had a contract with the Defense Department, had decided that they had enough of the bureaucracy and they wanted to close their doors down. So I figured that, I had about 6-8 months before that happened. So I started writing then in anticipation of a new career, so to speak.
Absolutely. It's always great to get ahead of the curve. So that was very smart and mindful on your part. I love it. Now, the title of your book, When Shadows Come Home, I like that. It's a quite curious title. How did you come up with such a name?
Well, I have a prior book. My first book was about the same principal character here, and he had it's set in the early 18th century, and he is a Spanish colonel serving in the New Mexico area, and he explained that from heaven We All Look Like Shadows Under a Sun, which was the name of that book. So in this particular book, he is called home, which is Spain. And so I kind of thought about that. And then there's something happens in the end of the story, which I don't want to give the story away, but something happens, and he's recalled home, real home.
I love it. I love it. Now, you kind of hinted that you started writing a little bit later, in that it wasn't something that you started in your 20s, but you started a little later. Do you think that that has made a difference in how you have chosen to write your book? Flip side of the coin, do you think that you have a better appreciation of the profession?
What I have is a better appreciation for the things I write about. However, when it comes to the profession of being a writer, I wish I had gone into the literary publishing business to begin with. You know, if you have a name like a Bill O'Reilly or Barack Obama or Sean Penn or any other well-known person, it's easy to market a book and sell it. But when nobody knows you, you know, you have to have some kind of means of marketing your book, and that's where the difficulties come in. I wish I had gone into that so I would have a better insight as to how to go about best marketing a book. I want people to read the story. I think they're wonderful stories, but at the same time, when you have millions of books being published every year and a reader has choices, you know, he's more likely to go with someone whose name he recognizes rather than someone with little name recognition.
Right. I can definitely understand that. Now, what inspired you to choose the characters that you chose, their personalities, as well as the location that you chose? Is there any personal reason, or did you think that it was just this was the best setting, the best personality to tell the story that you wanted to tell?
Well, after I finished my year in Vietnam, I spent a year and a half in Germany, and I had a lot of issues that I brought with me, and and these issues really offered a lot of problems, and I discovered that if I stayed busy and if I traveled around, it kept my mind occupied and away from really kind of dark memories from recurring. And so I traveled and I stayed busy. And when I was in Europe, in the military, I traveled all over the place, including Spain. And when I arrived there, I was intrigued by the culture, the people, and the scenery all around me. And it fascinated me to the extent of how could a small population from a small nation like this take and control half of the known world at the time. That was a fascinating thing. And years later in my life, I traveled to New Mexico, and again I got hit with the same question and realized, gosh, it's a great story here. And you can imagine somebody from a small peninsula in Europe all the way into the ends of the world, and going there and controlling it, and providing security for the people there. It was just something that was fascinating me, and as well as the people in those regions. So I decided to go ahead and write a book about that. And of course, the main character, the principal character, is a Colonel de la Boca, and this particular fella is kind of a dinosaur, even in his own time. He is a man of, integrity. He's a man whose whole purpose in life has been bred into him to serve God, then family, and then king, which I guess today's modern language would would transcribe to the people. So I decided to write something about that, and of course, like I said, he was a dinosaur at the time, even then, and it kind of reminds me of. I know that during World War II, on December the 8th, 1941, hundreds of thousands of Americans lined up to join the military after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And, even that, now looking back on it, would be kind of a downer. I don't know if we would have that same spirit of volunteerism today if it was to happen. I hope we would, but I kind of wonder.
Yeah. I too look back and with a sense of nostalgia. It's not something that I personally experienced. I'm not of that generation, but I do look back through what I believe to be kind of a lens of the stories that have been told to me, and I say, wow, what great character of past generations, in that they were ready. It was. Go ahead and send me, because this is important. Now, not everyone, of course. There were people who didn't want to go, and I understand that, and conscious objectioners and all of that. But for the people who did go, what an amazing thing that that happened, and to be able to come back and tell those stories. I was just talking about that in an event that I spoke for, and talking about my grandfather, my great-grandfather as well, and what an honor for me to have found out that they served in the war. Like, yes, it really and truly makes a difference that each person is trying to carry on that beautiful legacy. I agree with you there. Now, tell us about the main figure of the story, and how do you think that if he were placed in modern times, that he would be the same complicated character that you made him by chance, or do you think that he is he's placed in the perfect time period for him?
I don't know how he would survive our current era. It's kind of, if you think about the General Patton in World War II, I mean, he was a strange character, even for his time. And if you think about someone who is a devout, religious man, if you think about someone who will risk everything for a lowly life, if you think about someone who is charitable to a point where he gives 75% of his income, my gosh, we would probably have that person locked away today. But it's a wonderful character. I mean, this is a guy who has, more than he needs. So he is here, and he is brought up in a service type of mentality. His whole family has devoted themselves to being soldiers who serve the people, and that's what's been drilled into him, as he was growing up, and it's a trait that people admire. Although, look, I know I could never be that person, and maybe that's why I wrote. Maybe it's a kind of an alter ego for me, but I could never be that, and so that's why I decided to go through that. And one thing I discovered through people throughout my life, and I suspect that if I lived 300 years ago, I would notice the same thing about people then, that they're very much like they are today. There are some that are very courageous. There are some that are very greedy. There are some that are very nasty. There are some that are very brutal. And there are some that are very gentle. I mean, that's something that we've, it's always been among us. And I kind of chose most of the... Mm-hmm. I chose most of this kind of trait, the best traits, except that he's a soldier and he has to kill, and I had to incorporate that in there as well.
Right. But I think that by and large, I think most people do understand that when it is wartime, you have to do those things that are covered under war, and that would include defending not only yourself, but defending your fellow countrymen. So I think most people will definitely be able to understand that part and take it into context. But thank you for being mindful of those people as well. Well, Oscar, it is time for us to go to break. But before we do, can you remind everyone, please, what is the title of your book? Where can we get a copy? And how do we stay in contact with you?
The name of the book is When Shadows Come Home by my pen name. I write under O.G. Diaz. They can get the book at Amazon by going to Amazon Books and punching in the name O.G. Diaz on the search, and all my books will come up there. Or they can go to the publisher, Author House, and purchase the book directly from them.
Alrighty, listeners, now you know where you can get a copy of the book. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Butchester. My guest today is Oscar Diaz, and we are talking about his book, When Shadows Come Home. And I believe he said that you can find it under the pen name O.G. Diaz. With that being said, my next question for you, Oscar, is about the religious tone that you have taken in the book. Religion influences your story throughout the entire book, and including with your principal character. Why did you choose to create him as a devout worshiper? Why was it important to kind of shine a light on that part of his personality?
Well, the interesting thing is that in the 18th century, religion was a very important part. People of that era were just religious. Their lives were not as hectic as ours are today, and they had a lot more time to contemplate, God itself, and all the mysticism surrounding the issue of God. And it was just part of their daily life. The main character, Della Volca, had a routine that he performed every morning as soon as he rose from bed, and that was to get on his knees and pray to God to look kindly with his dead mother and father, and to also protect his sister and her family, and eventually his own family. This is a routine he carried out every day to the last day of his life. And it was just something that kind of fascinated me. We here, my gosh, man, sometimes we go through there and we say, I forgot to go to church yesterday, and it happens. And some people don't, they prefer to sleep in or take a day off, full long day off. But back then Sundays were a day of miracle where everybody got together. They had a day off and they went and praised God. And, it was a whole family thing. And of course, there were also the Dominicans around that if you failed to perform, you would have to face their challenges or their inquisition. But for all in all, it's just something that had existed. It was just part of daily life, just like when we drive to work, turn the radio on while we're driving, or we get on a cell phone. Religion was just very much interwound with with life itself. As for me, I have a sister who's married to a deacon in the Catholic Church, and they're always pressuring me by going to church, and I am what she refers to as a CEO, Christmas and Easter only. And I know I'm probably at that point in my life where I should be challenging things more and probably attending more Mass, but it just hasn't gotten to me. I know there's a God, and I know you just didn't crawl out of some cesspool and evolve through centuries and centuries of time. But it just hasn't hit me yet. I'm sure it will. And when it hits, I guess I'll be very, very religious.
Now, you kind of touched on it in the beginning of your answer, and that is a little bit of mysticism. Is there a little bit of mysticism that you have managed to kind of weave throughout the book as well?
You know, my mother divorced my dad when I was probably 1 or 2 years old. And we were pretty much raised by my grandmother because my mother came to the U.S. Originally, her side of the family were from Mississippi. After the Civil War, they refused to swear an oath of allegiance, and several different families migrated down to Honduras. And but she wanted to come back, and she wanted us to come up here also, which she eventually brought my 2 older sisters and I here. But in the meantime, I was raised by my grandmother, and she went through all of these different, quasi-religious people, healers, people who could foretell the future and all that. And I knew that back then there was a great deal of mysticism. In a lot of my readings, I came across this robed figure that the Apaches describe as descending from the sky, speaking in their language. So I decided to include some of that into the story, and I think it adds a little, it anchors down the religious foundation to the story, I think.
Absolutely. And I like how, depending on your culture, you're able to see bits and pieces of your culture included in the book as well. So I love that. I love that. Now, the primary woman of the book seems a little more contemporary, if you will, with her aspirations. Can you tell us a little bit about her?
Well, the one thing is that she was a very beautiful woman, and she was born to wealth in the Yucatan Peninsula. And, she was married off at a young age to a much older and very wealthy man, and who left her a widow. And she came across De La Boca, and there was chemistry occurred between the two of them, but she was very much into her personal comfort, and she guarded her wealth very well, and she was, my wife says she was kind of a selfish person. I guess I meant to put that in there, but when you compare someone to like De La Boca, who gives away 75% of his wealth, everybody else just sounds selfish. But anyway, her attitude starts changing as she becomes very well acquainted with De La Boca. She starts changing, her whole personality starts evolving. But he takes her to Spain with it, and they attend the court in the royal court in Madrid, and all of a sudden she's caught up, I guess, kind of like a Mabel, what's her last name, Marble with Prince Andrew. She's just caught up, sucked into this thing. And it's something that the main character, De La Boca, dislikes. He really hates the court life and all of the, I don't want to say butt kissing, but I don't know how else to say that goes on there, and all the evil that exists there. But she's caught up in it, and she's just enthralled by it.
I love it. I love it. Now, I believe you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I always like to let people know, because there's that person out there that says, I like what he's talking about. I definitely want to pick up a copy of When Shadows Come Home. So flip side of that is, do you have other books that you've written? Do you wish to continue writing?
Yes, there was my first project was that I had published was when Shadows Under the Sun. It involves the same principal characters. It takes place in New Mexico, and it came out in 2016, I believe, or 15. I can't even remember anymore. And it can be purchased at Amazon as well. The final book I had published is called The Soldier in Alligator Boots. It's about a young man from Ville Platte, Louisiana, small little town, and he finishes his year in Vietnam, and he is transferred to finish up his enlistment in Germany. And he throws himself into the culture. He loves it. He meets a couple of young ladies who just drag him into intrigue, Cold War intrigue, and it's kind of an exciting book. I enjoy it, and the poor fellow suffers from PTSD, and you can get some kind of inkling of what that is like when you read that story. I have several other projects underway, some of which kind of had me lead me into some severe bouts of the condition, and I have to take about a month or so off until it kind of clears out before I can get back into writing. But hopefully another year I'll have a couple more out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Oscar, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on and sharing with our audience here. I think that you have definitely teased the book just enough that people say, yep, I think I want to get a copy of that. Be it that we are dealing with COVID or we're not, there's nothing like a good book that you can really kind of cozy up with and have a good read. Thank you again for spending time with us. But before I let you go, if you can please remind everyone, what is the title of the book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
The name of the book is When Shadows Come Home by O.G. Diaz. You can get it at Amazon. Just go into the Amazon bookstore under the search. Just type in O.G. Diaz, and you'll have all the books that I have published out there. Or you can go to Author House, the publisher, and if anybody needs to get it would like to, they can send me an email at ogdiaz 6849@gmail.com, all lowercase.
I love it. Thank you again for being on the show. And listeners, thank you as well for spending time with me here today. We hope that we have enlightened, inspired, and empowered you as well. As always, may the Lord continue to shine His face upon you. May you receive His grace and His mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember, you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Good morning, and thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. You know what I like to do on the show. I want to enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. Now, Scripture reminds us that the tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire. And today we want you to be fired up about your health. That's something that we all need to be mindful of. But if you are dealing with some health concerns, you especially want to tune in because we have someone here that's going to share a bit of their story with us. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Purvis, and he's sharing on his book, How I Survived and Recovered from Severe Congestive Heart Failure. So go on and get comfy, get cozy, get your coffee, get your tea, because we're about to get started. Good morning, Dr. Stephen. Thank you so much for joining me on Daily Spark today.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on your show.
Thank you so much. Now, I feel that I may not have said the title of your book correctly. So can you...
Well, you were close.
Before we really get into it, though, I want to make sure that I have that right. What is the title?
How I Survived and Recovered from Severe Congestive Heart Failure. and a severely enlarged heart.
Now, before we start talking about your book, there are some folks out there who are unfamiliar with who you are or with your work. With that being said, can you take a few moments, please, and introduce yourself to our listeners today? What makes you, you?
Well, okay. First off, I was born in Atlanta, Georgia, and I came out west to California with Lockheed Georgia Company. I was a flight test engineer, and I came out to work on the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane project in 1969. And later I met my wife at a wedding of a friend down in L.A. Got married and stayed here. I was in the software business for over 23 years, and then I fell down some stairs, fractured two vertebrae in my low back, and that subsequently ended up in me deciding to go to chiropractic college and become a doctor of chiropractic. And my practice was in a town called Citrus Heights, which is adjacent to Sacramento, the capital of California. And I'm retired now. I've been retired for some years. In February 2001, I'd just gotten into my car. I was coming home from my office, and I felt really deep pain in my chest. So I went to the hospital. Or my wife took me to the hospital, and they examined me. They said I had not suffered a heart attack, and they sent me in to get a scan of my heart, and that revealed that I had severe congestive heart failure. And I was told I had less than 5 years to live.
I want to definitely give you some more time to talk about that. But before we get into that, being an author, is that something that you always wanted to do, or did you find that the time was just perfect to share your story as it happened at that particular junction in life?
I've thought about being an author, but I really wasn't that motivated until I recovered from my heart condition, which I've been told by cardiologists they've never heard of anything like that happening before. And after I recovered, I thought, I should share this experience because I have found a way to repair heart tissue and heart valve tissue, and that was thought to be not. Let me rephrase this. I was taught in medical school that heart tissue cannot be repaired and you can't grow more of it. And as it so happens, I have both my heart valves. I had severe valve leaks in my heart tissue. When you have a heart attack, you suffer some necrosis or death of some of the heart tissue itself. And I've basically recovered. And when I discovered I had the heart condition, being a chiropractor, I wanted to look at alternatives. So I started looking for alternatives. I found one, and I started, applying what they recommended. And I think that allowed me to survive up until the time I developed some protocols, and I followed my own protocols. And within 2 years after I started, which was in 2014. And by 2016, less than 2 years, my heart had recovered. It was down to a normal size. It had been greatly enlarged, had no sign of valve leaks, and my heart was functioning normally. And that, for me, that was a miracle from God. And I've always gave God credit for it, and I do in my book too.
Now, with all of the research that you had to do, how did that assist you in preparing for writing the book and getting all of the medical facts together?
Well, the medical facts I pretty much had. I did a little review in some of my text from school, but the big review, I had to go through over 6,400 pages of my medical report to pull out what I did for the book. My original rendition was huge, over 300 pages, and my son was looking at it. He says, "You need to cut this down. Just basically give people the idea, or tell people what happened to you and what you went through, and then tell people what your protocols are and how they too can recover from heart disease, and specifically from congestive heart failure." So I followed my son's recommendation, and I ended up with the book. I published it on Amazon.com, and it's both an ebook and a printed format.
Now, the next question is about the term that you use, congestive heart failure. Many people know what it is. Unfortunately, far too many have dealt with it and still suffer from it. But for those who are unfamiliar with that medical term, what is congestive heart failure?
Well, congestive heart failure is the lack of the left ventricle's ability. Okay, let me start out briefly describing the heart. Heart is divided into 4 chambers. You have upper chambers, the right atrium, which deoxygenated blood flows into the right atrium, and then it flows through a valve into the right ventricle, pardon me. And from the right ventricle, it flows through the lungs and is oxygenated, and then flows back to the left atrium, and then from the left atrium to the left ventricle, where it's pumped out to the body. The congestion occurs it can occur in all of the chambers, but generally it occurs in the left ventricle, and the heart is not able to pump out enough blood to service the rest of the body, enough oxygenated blood to service the rest of the body. Now, the way you measure that is something called an ejection fraction. And what it is, it's a fraction or a percentage, if you will, of the amount of blood in the left ventricle that's pumped out each heartbeat to the rest of the body. And normal people, 55 to 70% of the oxygenated blood is pumped out from the left ventricle to the body, rest of the body. Now, in my case, well, anything under 50% is considered congestive heart failure. Anything under 30% is considered severe congestive heart failure. And I was under 20% when I was first measured. And okay, that answers that question, I think. I hope it does. So by following my protocols, I know that a person can recover from congestive heart failure. And the other thing, I had severe valve leaks, and now have no sign of valve leaks. So again, the protocols will cover valve leaks. And my heart, which had swollen dramatically, enlarged dramatically, is down to normal size. And again, that was by following my protocols in my book. So, does that answer the question?
It does. Well, listeners, we need to take a very short break, but we'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I am your host, Dr. Angela Chester. My guest today is Dr. Stephen Purvis, and we're talking about his book, How I Survived and Recovered from Severe Congestive Heart Failure and a Severely Enlarged Heart. Now, Dr. Stephen, my next question for you is dealing with a heart attack itself. Many people will have a heart attack, and that's when they first find out that there's something wrong in the first place. Other people will have some symptoms of something going on, and they, with, of course, conversations with their doctor, they find out that that's what's wrong. How did you come to know your situation? Did you suffer a heart attack?
Well, I did suffer heart attacks, actually more than one. I never knew when I suffered a heart attack. I was feeling so poorly at one point. I was confined to an electric wheelchair. I could only take a couple of steps at a time without the risk of collapsing. And I was breathing like I ran a marathon with those 2 steps. So basically, signs of a heart attack, that you're going to have one. There can be numbness in the left arm, and specifically numbness in the left fingers and hand. That's for a male, basically. If most of the time when you have a heart attack, it feels like an elephant sat on your chest. That's what they taught us in medical school. I never felt that. I did feel tingling in my hands at times. I did have chest pain because I knew I had angina, and I was taking pills for that, nitrogen pills. So anyhow, I no longer do that. I no longer have the pain in my chest. So that's with men. With women, it can be something in the back, behind the heart. So men and women have different symptoms. I just don't know why that is. I just know that's what I was taught.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you for that mention, because most women do not realize that they are suffering because they're looking for the signs that of a male heart attack. Because by and large, for the majority of my life, those have been the signs and symptoms that have been shared, and not the symptoms for women. So you are so right, because sometimes our pain and discomfort can be felt in both arms, like you said, in the back, sometimes in the neck or in the jaw. So it's a little bit different for us. But thank you so much for that reminder. Now, for some people, when they're dealing with heart ailments, they also open themselves up, if you will, to stroke. Did you have to deal with the worry, the concerns? Did you have a stroke as well?
I did have a stroke. It was, when was it? 2011. In the fall of 2011, I had a stroke. I lost my ability to speak for a few days, and I had other stroke signs: deviated tongue, weakness on the left side. That indicated a stroke occurred in the right cerebrum, or the front of the brain. And Brophy's speech area was affected. That's in the right cerebrum as well. I regained my ability to speak after a few days, and after a few weeks, I was told I had made a 95 to 100% recovery. I was very fortunate. So I don't suffer any more symptoms from that any longer. And the cardiologist, the neurologist, and the cardiologist felt that what I suffered was called an Afib stroke, and that's where the atrium, the upper chamber of the heart, isn't pumping enough, is out of sync with the lower chambers, the ventricles, and enough oxygenated blood doesn't get to the brain. And that was the case with me. And so that caused the stroke. So by following my protocols, you'll improve your heart function dramatically, and you won't suffer an Afib stroke. Now, the other type of strokes, unfortunately, it is something that has happened in my family, is where a blood vessel ruptures in the brain. So fortunately, I have never had that kind of stroke, but I've had other members of my family that have had that kind of stroke, and I don't think that anything I recommend can help that. I just don't know what to recommend for that condition.
And thank you for explaining the differences. And listeners, you may be familiar. I know that at certain times of the year, you hear people talking about the acronym FAST when talking about a stroke, the facial drooping, the arm weakness, speech difficulties, and time. If something, if stroke runs in your family, please by all means Google that at a later date. You never know how that, just knowing those simple facts, could save your life. And Dr. Stephen, thank you so much for mentioning that there are different types of strokes that you can have. We need to be very, very mindful of what's going on in our bodies. You are so correct with that. Now, as someone who has dealt with having cancer, and praise the Lord, I am cancer-free and have been for quite some time, it can be a very scary thing going through your health concerns and issues when you're in that moment. Not to be insensitive in any way, but were you worried? Were you scared? Were you apprehensive about what you were going through? And especially that you have the medical knowledge, you understood exactly what was happening to you. Did you ever have that moment of just worry and fear?
Well, yeah, I mean, early on I did. First thing, I suffered from prostate cancer, and I was cured. So I'm thankful for that personally. So yeah, when I first was told I had less than 5 years to live in 2001, I just didn't want to believe it, so I didn't. And in 2005, my lease was up, and I decided to close my practice, and I moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and bought a practice there. And I just felt that, I was okay, but I was dealing with more people there, and my heart started bothering me a lot. I ended up in the ER room twice, and my cardiologist sent me an email and followed up with a phone call and told me to get my get myself back to California where he could keep an eye on me. So I sold the practice and moved back. I did that because my mother lived and grandmother lived close to Douglasville, and I wanted to be able to go and see them because they were getting old. My grandmother was well over 100 by then. She lived to 106, and Mom was in her 70s. So I did that to be able to see them, and my wife was going to move to Birmingham too, but my health conditions did not allow me to stay. So I sold the practice, moved back to California, and she came and actually flew out and drove me back. I wasn't in condition to drive, and that was in 2005. So let's see, in 2011, I'm sorry, 2011, the time I had the stroke, they told me I might not survive the night in the hospital. My wife and my daughter were with me. My son was at home. And so I survived the night, and he came in and said, well, I've got worse news for you. You won't survive the week. He said my ejection fraction, which in a normal person is 55 to 70%. My ejection fraction was in single digits, and he said, there's no way you'll last the week. So they sent me home with morphine, put me on home hospice care. A non-denominational minister came out to minister to me, and thank God he came out. He prayed with me. It was very emotional. So anyhow, I wasn't afraid. I'd been told I was going to die so often, I was no longer afraid. So I just, I'd made peace with my Maker. I'd been saved. I was raised Pentecostal holiness in the Deep South. And so I knew I would close my eyes and wake up in heaven. And I just wanted it to be pain-free. And I prayed for my family. That was who I was praying for. But at that time, I no longer had a fear of dying. I felt like it was inevitable. So why fear it if you can't do anything about it, right? So that was kind of my attitude. And 6 weeks later, I graduated from hospice. They did another study on my heart, and they said my heart was back up to close to 20%. And it was that way until I started my protocols in April of 2014, and by March of 2016, an echocardiogram indicated that my heart was normal size, no sign of valve leaks, and my ejection fraction was 55 to 60%, which is in the normal range. At that time, I was 2 months shy of being 67, and I'd gained a lot of weight. My weight was almost 400 pounds. Now, I've lost a lot of weight. I've lost over 150 pounds, still losing weight from that time. when you felt as bad as I did, you didn't watch what you ate, and my activity level was virtually zero. So anyhow.
Wow, you really and truly, you have made so many changes, and you've really been, your best advocate, and as long as you've made those changes and you were mindful, I think that that's helpful. So many times people, they're informed of what's going on, they're told what they need to do to correct the situation, and they say, well, like they just can't make the change to save their lives, literally. So I'm glad that you were able to make those changes and to be able, to share your story. And we have about 2 minutes left, but I wanna make sure that I ask you this one last question, and that is, you talk about the protocol and how you were able to assist yourself in the healing process. For someone who picks up a copy of your book, how should they understand the protocols that you have included? Is it easy for someone who has no medical education to be able to follow through? Are they going to have to Google some terms? Did you make it easy enough for just the regular Joe and Jane?
It's easy enough. My son has no medical training whatsoever. He's a physicist, but it's easy enough to where he looked at it. He says, "Oh, okay." And my wife had no medical training, and she follows part of the protocol because she suffers from diabetes. Stage adult onset diabetes. So that puts people in that category. They have a risk of heart attack, so she follows my protocols too.
Absolutely, that's smart on her behalf. I know that kind of probably perked someone's ears up out there, saying, "Oh yeah, that's true." So yes, if that perked your ears up, you too should probably get a copy of the book so that you can find out what it is that you need to do. Well, Dr. Stephen Purvis, thank you so much for coming on and spending time with me here today on Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. Before I let you go, though, can you remind everyone of the title of your book, where can we get a copy, and how do we stay in contact with you?
Okay, it's How I Survived and Recovered from Severe Congestive Heart Failure and a Severely Enlarged Heart by Stephen Purvis, Stephen, and then P as in Paul, UR, V as in Victor, IS. And it's on Amazon.com in both ebook and printed format.
I love it. Dr. Stephen Purvis, thank you again for being here on Daily Spark with
one other thing. I'm on Facebook as Stephen Ronald Purvis. I added my middle name.
All right. That's not a problem. Thank you again for being on. And listeners, thank you for spending time with us here as well. As always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you receive his grace and his mercy in all that you do. Until next time, everyone, remember, you are blessed in the Lord. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.